Well, it's 10 o'clock, so we'll kick off at 10 o'clock in Queensland, wherever you are in the world or around the country. Thanks for joining us. This is the first of our new Southpac webinar series. So excited to have you. And we're kicking it off today with the topic of what is HOP and what it isn't. So HOP's human and organisational performance. It's one of the key areas that we deliver here at Southpac through the HOPLAB, and Andy Shone is presenting today. He's our CEO and the founder of the HOPLAB, going way back to 2017 when he brought HOP and learning teams to Australia and New Zealand for the first time. So great to have you all join us, and we'll pass it over to Andy to kick us off.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Good to see some familiar names in the participants list today, but also see some new names as well. It's always good to have the opportunity to speak to a new audience. So welcome along, everyone. What is HOP and what it isn't is something that I've been giving a lot of thought to relatively recently, especially as we've seen HOP become more and more popular and more people beginning to talk about HOP and action HOP. So one of the things we were thinking about is, well, while it's getting so popular, it's also kind of interesting to see maybe some of the ways in which we maybe could be in danger of going the wrong way, or potentially in danger of giving people the wrong impression of what HOP is and what it's not. So as with many things, as it becomes popular, we start to see some challenges. Some of the challenges that we're seeing at the moment, or some of the things that we're observing, I would have found it hard to believe that we would be seeing these challenges back in 2017 when we first started running HOP and learning teams workshops and training here in Australia and New Zealand, as Katie mentioned. The first workshop we ran with Bob Edwards as a collaboration back in 2017, we literally couldn't give away places on that training. People were like, what's HOP and what's a learning team? Why would I be interested? Whereas now it really seems to be proliferating everywhere, and there's a new HOP specialist on every street corner. And what goes with that, it seems to be, and it probably has been the case in all types of different things as it's been new and it's gained in popularity. So we're kind of seeing turf wars and tribalism and who are you following and who's hot and who's not. We're seeing lots of kind of copywriting and trademarking, and kind of goes with turf wars as well. And oftentimes of even ideas or concepts that aren't even necessarily owned by the people who are doing the copywriting and trademarking. And that kind of goes hand in hand with this kind of broad brush kind of commercialization of HOP and all the things that go along with it. And commercialization is inevitable and is fine. We're all trying to make operate businesses. But I think there's a danger of us losing sight of what is it that HOP is about and what is it we're trying to achieve. And this kind of also has grown to then a growing number of misconceptions about what is HOP. One thing I thought of when putting this presentation together was this article I saw some time back called HOP Done Right, as if there is only one way to do HOP. And that's that way. Obviously, the author of that article believed they had the right way. And I'm not sure if that's entirely helpful, either for people who are interested in HOP or their organizations who are potentially going to be engaging with this. So I think all of these things potentially are growing pains. Growing pains associated with obviously a big growth in popularity and I guess also awareness of human and organizational performance. So what are some of the things that HOP is not? I think there's a few things that are worth just really focusing on before we go into what HOP is. Probably worth framing what HOP isn't. So right from the outset, one of the things that HOP isn't or shouldn't be is dogmatic. The whole point of engaging in HOP and other, I guess, new and emerging safety theories is to not be dogmatic, but to be open-minded, to be willing to learn, to engage, to challenge existing norms and perspectives and be willing to change them. It would be somewhat hypocritical if HOP people said, it's fine for us to challenge our organizations, and challenge people to think differently, but we ourselves are not willing to change or think about things differently. We can't have it both ways. We have to both be willing to engage in potential things that maybe that's not entirely right. Maybe there's another way of looking at this. So hop practitioners shouldn't be dogmatic in terms of saying this is the only and the right way of doing things. Hop isn't a theory of everything. It doesn't have a complete and unified theory of everything to do with safety and people and organizations and all those things. We haven't got the answer to everything. It's a set of principles and guiding ideas which are helpful and I think broadly true, but it doesn't mean this is a theory for everything and we can discard everything else. I also don't believe hop is a fad. So what is a fad? So I got the dictionary definition up here. Fad is an intense and widely shared enthusiasm for something, especially one that is short-lived. It may be a craze. Well, I think we're definitely seeing a big growth in popularity and awareness of hop, but as the saying goes, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. As that expression is indicating, sometimes something appears to have come out of nowhere and it's suddenly really huge. But what people have missed is the long build-up and the kind of slow growth leading prior to it. So I think hop is here to stay. Whether it stays exactly as it is right now is another matter. But I think that the ideas and concepts, because they are broadly in line with the general direction of safety science and in line with general approaches in leadership and in other disciplines as well, I think hop is here to stay and is not a fad, but I think it does have some fad-like qualities at times, and some of which I've already alluded to. Hop is not a replacement for everything else. So there's no book burning necessary. Again, this is maybe sometimes seen in the kind of in the zeal of new converts that everything else is no longer necessary and everything else that came before this is all completely for nothing. We have everything we need now. This isn't the case either. Hop doesn't necessarily replace everything that's gone prior. There are certainly some practices and some ideas that maybe aren't so helpful to us anymore. And that's fine. We adjust and we adapt and we move beyond those things that aren't so helpful. But we also want to build on the things, many useful things that we've done over many years and many decades even, that have helped us to get to where we are today. So no, we're not looking to replace everything else. So what can be helpful when we're framing this conversation about what hop is and what hop isn't, is to think about this question: why did we need hop in the first place? Why did people become interested in new approaches and new ideas to safety? Well, I know for me personally, there's probably a range of different things that got me interested in looking at new ways, but certainly one, and we see this everywhere still today, is that traditional safety, or the way we've done safety in a lot of different industries, safety is targeted behavior. It's been very focused on our people and saying, well, we need to modify or change their behavior. And we've seen behavior as both the target and also the problem and the cause about issues. So Decker uses the term in safety differently. Traditional safety sees people as the problem rather than as the problem solvers, or people as the solution. And I used to hear this term a lot, and I still do in some places we go to. It might be the safety manager, and they'll say something like, we have great systems. We have really good processes and procedures, and it's all beautiful, but our people just don't follow our systems. And you think, oh, well, how great is the system if people aren't following it or aren't aware of it? So rather than seeing people as being the problem, why is it that they're not engaged with your safety system? I have people also say, our people are not engaged in safety, or people aren't interested in safety. I find that fundamentally wrong, personally. I think people are generally interested in safety, certainly their safety of themselves and for their team. What they maybe not be engaged or interested in is the bureaucratic approach we're taking to safety. Sure, they might not be very interested in the safe work method statement they had to sign onto at the start of the day. They might not be terribly interested in the read and sign or the safety alert or the bulletin or whatever it might be, which is not terribly relevant to them or their work. So, but that's a very different problem. It's not that people aren't interested in safety. They might just not be interested in the approach that we're taking and our bureaucratic approach to safety. So that's one reason why people have become interested in HOP. It's moving beyond seeing people as the problem, but wanting to work with, collaborate, and engage with people. I think also tied to that, I think Drew Ray and Dave Proven have kind of captured this quite nicely in their term safety work versus the safety of work. I think all safety professionals and any manager or leader who has any kind of role in safety will have seen and witnessed that absolute explosion and proliferation of safety work, particularly in the last 10 years or so. Most organizations we speak to are saying we have never done more stuff, more safety stuff than we do now, whether that's inductions and procedures and audits and inspections and safety stand downs and toolbox talks and all of the things, managing systems and so on and so forth and on it goes. So organizations feel like they're doing more and more stuff, but maybe not seeing the results they would hope to see for having put in so much more effort. So HOP really is a way of helping us to, well, how do we get better at focusing on and understanding the operational activity, the work that is happening in our organization right now? So rather than just saying, well, we just need to do more of what we're already doing, do it better. It's like, so, well, yes, we need safety work. We need all these things that we've traditionally been doing, but is that all that we need? And is just doing more and more of the same thing going to make us more safe? So it kind of leads us to a situation where we have on the left-hand side, we have many of the things we would call traditional safety has been categorized or referred to as maybe centralized control as an approach for safety. This would be what Holnagel would call the safety one approach, which oftentimes focuses on systems, standards, procedures, rules, making sure that we have all the things worked out so we can ensure that we prevent things from going wrong. And oftentimes this then appears to be very much focused on safety work. So ensuring that we have procedures and systems, ensuring they're enforced, but we're monitoring them and so forth. And this is being seen in some circles now as being wrong, that we shouldn't have this stuff, or it's the wrong things to be pursuing, which again, I believe is unhelpful. If you're going to be boarding an airliner and flying on holiday somewhere, you want to ensure that the airline has all of these things on the left-hand side in place. You get a certain amount of assurance knowing that they do have those things in place. So the question is not so much should we be doing these things, it's to what extent. Because on the other side of the slide here, we have what we'd call adaptive capacity with a safety 2 perspective, which is focused on adaptations and adjustments and seeing them as being absolutely necessary in order for things to go well. And we have approaches that are in line with this, which tend to be more focused on the safety of work and more focused on work in general. They kind of talk a lot about decluttering and removing some of the systems and standards, procedures, and rules. So this shouldn't be seen as a dichotomy. It shouldn't be seen as, oh, it's either one or the other. Are you like a old school traditional safety person, which is all this stuff on the left, or are you a kind of new view person, which is all this stuff on the right? It is not mutually exclusive. What we really should be involved in a conversation of, and what HOP should be involved in a conversation of, is how do we achieve balance between these two things? We need the framework. We absolutely need systems and standards and procedures and rules. We want to have things in place to prevent things from going wrong. We do need the safety of the safety work oftentimes. Sometimes these are necessary even just to be able to operate. We need to assure our regulators and our outside stakeholders that we know what we're doing and that we have systems in place to ensure that we can do it effectively. And safety one is not replaced by safety too. We do, of course, want to ensure that as few things as possible go wrong. The difficulty is all of these things on the left are not sufficient on their own. We also need to have adaptive capacity. We need that freedom in the framework, which goes to the adaptations and adjustments. That's where HOP really helps us. HOP can help us on both sides of this equation, but it's particularly helpful in exploring the adaptive capacity of our organization and helping to build adaptive capacity, helping us to understand what's really happening in work right now, helping us to be proactive. So it is not an all or nothing approach. Anyone who's telling you HOP is about removing these things on the left, that's not true. Now, we may want to rebalance. We may say there are things that we are doing which are really unhelpful currently to us achieving our goals, whether it's in safety or in quality or productivity or whatever it might be. But it is not about eliminating one side or the other. It's about finding balance. So that leads us more towards then what actually is HOP. We talked a bit about what HOP isn't. Well, what is HOP? Well, we mentioned here HOP is not a program. So it's another not. So HOP is not something you can just buy off the shelf, even though there seems to be more and more stuff available you can buy off the shelf. It is not a program you can just plug into your organization and say, oh, that's it, we're doing HOP now. HOP is an operating philosophy insofar as it goes to the deeper kind of values and beliefs of the organization. It's about really kind of re-examining and looking at what we believe about safety, what we believe about people, what we believe about accidents, how do accidents happen? Do things like root causes, do they really exist? Are people a problem to be solved, or are they solutions to our problems? So HOP requires to do this sustainably in the long term. It's not something that can be just rolled out. It needs to really engage in a meaningful and deep way with everyone from supervisors up to our senior leadership team, their kind of approach and which is underpinned by their values and beliefs about safety. So where has HOP come from? Sometimes people will say to me, things that, oh, this isn't new, Andy, or we've known this for a long time, or some of these ideas are very familiar. And all of those things are true. There's not that much in HOP which is entirely new. HOP is a combination of things which we've known for a long time, some things that we've known for a little bit of time, and some things which are more new. But it's drawing from a variety of different disciplines and places. So whether it's psychology, complexity science, human performance, human factors, leadership. I particularly find that with human factors, people say, oh, so many of these ideas are familiar and new. And I say that's absolutely true. Many things that we talk about in HOP are known in human factors. But when I was speaking at a human factors and ergonomics conference in Canada a few weeks ago, I made the point that, well, you may know these things, but how well has the human factors discipline been able to influence organizations to adopt the things that human factors knows? Has human factors really had an influence at the top table? Well, in many organizations, it hasn't. Whereas HOP now is getting recognition and is getting a voice at the top table and can maybe influence some of the things that human factors thus far hasn't been able to. So there are many influences and inputs, you could say, to HOP. And they kind of most frequently are then kind of presented to the world in these 5 principles. There is more to HOP than these 5 principles, but these 5 principles contain or act as containers for a whole range of other ideas, concepts, and approaches which together form this operating philosophy we call HOP. So I'm going to just spend like a brief moment going through each of these principles, not as we would if we were in a HOP fundamentals class going through in detail, going through all the various different concepts, but just framing how the principles can shift organizational behavior and priorities. So first of all, people make mistakes. So what is it that HOP is trying to present and convey through this principle? Well, first up, the principle is trying to convey something we should probably all know or should know, that we're all fallible and mistakes are a normal part of being human. Um, Many disciplines and many people have known this for a long time. But just because we've always known it doesn't mean that organizations behave in a way that shows that they know or understand that. People can still be very shocked when people make mistakes at work if it leads to a bad outcome. Go, oh, what were they thinking? Why did they do that? Well, probably because they were human and humans make errors and mistakes. Something else that this principle seeks to achieve and help organizations to understand is mistakes is broader than just errors. Generally speaking, errors we refer to as unintentional actions or inactions. So an error is something you didn't intend to do. Um, Now, those, as a consequence, errors tend to be easier to forgive. Not always, but generally it's easier to forgive an error. Okay, a person didn't intend to do it. But mistake goes broader than errors. Mistake also incorporates intentional actions. Someone who says, I am not going to follow this procedure. I'm not going to follow this rule. I'm going to circumvent this system, but for good intent, for good reasons. Because let's face it, many people, probably all of us, at some point have broken a rule, a procedure, or a guideline in our own organizations for the right reason and got a good outcome. Now, that's not to say it's necessarily the right thing to do, but it's accepting the fact that oftentimes it's necessary to step outside of or work around the systems that we have in place. So people make mistakes, but it's very often with good intent. So punishing that tends to be quite counterproductive if we're not addressing the reasons why people are doing the things that they do. Hop also states that our people should never be one mistake away from a significant incident or accident. There are places where, and it occasionally does come up, where we have performance or safety performance which is heavily dependent on humans getting things 100% right. That is still going to be a brittle system. We are completely dependent on people performing reliably, which, let's face it, humans are lots of good things, but reliable is not one of the things we always are. So the focus of this principle is moving away from just focusing on the mistakes and errors that are seen to be uniquely belonging to the human and looking more to the conditions. So this actually isn't just about being reactive, this principle, getting people comfortable with errors and mistakes, but it's also about them being proactive, identifying the conditions that make it easier to make errors and mistakes, and then doing something about it. We also acknowledge in HOP that efforts to eliminate error, so things like you may have heard programs like the war on error or zero error or things like that, we're accepting that these are not going to be useful long-term sustainable strategies. But oftentimes they're actually going to make things worse because it drives reporting and sharing and learning kind of underground. People don't want to bring forward their errors and mistakes in that sort of environment. And this principle really is kind of wrapping it all together, saying, well, asking people to try harder is not a strategy. Now, people can say, what do you mean by that? Asking people to try harder. Organizations don't do that. Well, they don't use those words, but they use essentially that's the approach they take when they do things like, can you please review this procedure, reread it, and sign to say that I understand it and I will operate in this way going forward. That's essentially asking people to try harder. Asking people to redouble their efforts or keep your mind on task or any of these sorts of quite hollow statements which are encouraging people to be more careful or to perform better. Essentially is asking people to try harder, and that's not going to be a sustainable long-term strategy. So that's our first principle. People make mistakes. Second principle, blame fixes nothing. Now, this is probably one of the more controversial principles. And goes back to really the question throughout this webinar, what HOP is and what HOP isn't. Blame fixes nothing is not the same as saying we should be in a blame-free environment at all times, which is the way HOP is sometimes being categorized. HOP really is saying here, blame if in itself doesn't make a situation better, and blame shouldn't be our first go-to response. because we acknowledge that blame may be satisfying. It makes people feel better at the time. Let's face it, make the organization feel better. It might make society feel better at a time, but it doesn't necessarily fix the original problem. Uh, and we also have to acknowledge, and the safety science is quite clear here, an organization that has a blame culture or a punitive culture is going to be impeding its ability to learn. Blame will get in the way of learning. And going hand in hand with that, blame is nuanced. It's not just the kind of, as one organization used to do, the window seat. Someone involved in an event would be on the first flight out of the site, never to be seen again. That's kind of very obvious and overt blame. Blame can be sometimes more subtle and nuanced than that. Even judgment of people after an event is a form of blame allocation. So blame is quite nuanced, and we have to be trying to see the world through the eyes of those who are on the receiving end of blame, um, rather than our own perspective, which sometimes, especially if we're reasonably senior in the organization, can be, well, we don't have a blame culture. We don't do blame. Well, sometimes when we speak to people at the front line, it feels quite different. So blame's easy to do. It's hard to reverse. And awareness is the first step, and that's what we're trying to help organizations to appreciate with this principle. But as I said at the outset, blame fixes nothing does not mean never blame. So where the kind of nuance comes in here is, even in organizations that are doing what I call traditional just culture, the just culture process can be used and abused to end up just creating more blame. It can be just more blame, but with a process attached. So Hop is really trying to move the conversation along and say, well, that's probably not doing us a whole world of good. Blame shouldn't be our first go-to response. Blame is going to get in the way of learning. But there will always be a time and a place where blame and punishment can be appropriate. So obviously willful actions that lead to a bad outcome, knowing that it's going to lead to a bad outcome. So we're talking like malevolent actions, sabotage, maybe even horseplay and so forth. All those doing things for kicks and giggles, those things certainly are outside of the purview of this. No person, no safety manager or safety leader who's even subscribed to HOP is going to say, well, I'm going to cover everything with this principle. There'll never be any consequences. That's not the intent. One of the things I sometimes say is a society that has no rules isn't free. A society that doesn't have any rules is in chaos. So rules are necessary to be able to have freedom within them. The rules we have out in society protect us and allow us to have the freedoms that we enjoy. And it's the same in an organization. There, of course, have got to be limits. It's more around where those limits are and how do we treat people who maybe do the wrong thing, but for the right reason. Our third principle, context drives behavior. I think this one's one of the maybe more understood principles. I see less kind of egregious misinterpretations of this particular principle, but certainly what we're trying to achieve with this principle when we talk to organizations about this, we're trying to move the focus to conditions and context rather than choices. Because whenever we just focus on choices, particularly post-event, it can always look like someone just made a wrong choice. If only they'd done this instead of that. Why did they put their hand there? They shouldn't have done that. They should know not to put themselves in the line of fire. Why did they deviate from that particular procedure? Everyone knows we should do it that way. Well, if that's our thought process, we're only ever going to focus on that perceived choice or decision. Whereas Hop is really trying to move the focus and say, well, actually, if we seek to understand the conditions and context that people are operating in, oftentimes the decisions or the choices that people make become a lot more, well, they seem less like decisions and choices and more like just the sensible thing that most people would do in the same situation. So we assume the fact that behavior and actions have got to be understood in the context in which they happened. They can't be understood as just and judged on their own. They have to be understood in context. Behaviors don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in a system and a context, and we need to seek to understand that. So yeah, HOP adopts a systems thinking view, what we try to take a wider view rather than just focusing on individual parts, which oftentimes might be the person. HOP is cautious about metrics. There's no doubt about that, and that's would apply to all new view approaches. But that doesn't mean that HOP says we shouldn't have metrics. One of the kind of things that people talk about a lot is LTIFR or TRIFR. And yes, that they're not good measures for lots of different reasons, but it's not to say that it should never be measured. It may be part of a balanced scorecard. It may be something where you decide, well, it's really not a good measure to be communicating in the organization or out to our workforce, because there's lots of potentially undesirable side effects that go along with that. But a HOP practitioner would never say, don't measure it or don't have metrics. It's just being aware of how metrics influence and shape behaviors and decisions on a day-to-day basis, which inevitably they do. So this principle also has to be understood. It's not just about accidents and incidents. In fact, all the HOP principles aren't just about accidents and incidents. I've heard it said that HOP is a really good way, it's a good framework for putting into investigations, which it is. And it helps the principles that guide how we learn about things that have already gone wrong. HOP isn't just about things that have already gone wrong. HOP is also about an operating model for looking and moving forwards. And that very much builds on the sort of human factors perspective of it's about making things easy to do right and hard to do wrong. So about creating the conditions for success. That's our third principle. Fourth principle, learning is vital. And I think this bit is really very well understood out there in the great marketplace of ideas. I think people get that HOP is very closely related to things like learning teams. I guess the key thing is HOP and learning teams, that they're not the only things that HOP have to offer. So learning teams is a relatively new approach, but learning teams isn't the only way of fulfilling this principle that learning is vital. So what is learning is vital trying to convey to organizations that are engaging in HOP? Well, for one, the fact that variability is everywhere and the fact that adaptations are critical to success. That kind of old school view of we have great systems and just follow the system and you'll be fine. We say, well, yeah, we need the systems and hopefully the systems and guidelines and rules and procedures help, but very rarely do they capture all the variability and all the adaptations required to be successful. So every organization has what we call a black line and a blue line. So the kind of black line being the kind of this nice straight world is perfect line. That's all our rules and policies and procedures. But every organization also has a blue line. It's kind of squiggly, messy line, which captures all the variability and messiness of everyday work. Because let's face it, adaptations are required all the time to be successful. And only sometimes do those adaptations lead to bad events. What else is this principle pushing us towards? Well, it's trying to push us beyond linear and what we call linear and simple explanations. So why did this event happen? Well, because someone didn't follow procedure, or this particular part failed. Well, that is the case sometimes, but almost always there is more to be learned by going beyond the simple and the obvious. So organizations tend to be very complex and there's lots of variability and interconnected factors that come together for an event to happen, just as there is when we don't have an event and when things are going really well. So this principle is trying to push us beyond accepting simple explanations and go, yeah, I think there's probably more to this. I think there's more we haven't understood yet. We need to probably learn more before we just satisfy, yeah, we know why this happened. So as it mentions there, it encourages understanding of the messy story of our complex organization. And that can manifest itself in many different ways. One of which is the very proactive practice of learning from normal work. We don't believe that accidents and incidents and normal work are totally different. We have this kind of, oh, well, normally work happens like this, but when we have an accident or an event, it's totally different. That might be the case sometimes, but very often accidents and normal work have most of the same things. Lots of the same constituent parts are there and present. They just come together in a slightly different way. So HOP is very much encouraging us to be proactive, to go out and learn from and seek to understand everyday work. And finally, HOP really is about shifting our focus in terms of risk rather than trying to prevent everything, which we know is not possible. We have to focus on things that stuff that kills us and stuff that bankrupts us. So the real critical risk. And this is like one of those interesting intersections between HOP and things like critical risk management. We need both. And they're not opposed to each other. HOP informs the approach we take to things like critical risk management. So that's the fourth principle. The final principle, response matters. So what's this principle trying to encourage organizations to do or to not do? Well, the fifth principle posits that how leaders respond to success and failure matters a tremendous amount. How we respond to failure will define whether we learn from that failure or whether we double down on the failure and lock in the losses, so to speak. So the principle is encouraging us to think about, do we want blame and punishment to be our main primary response, or do we want our focus to be on learning and improvement? Are we interested in accountability, which is quite different to blame and punishment? So our response should be geared around accountability and a proactive accountability, which is looking forward, which is how do we make this situation better? Who has obligations to be met here? How do we improve moving forward now this event has happened? It also tries to move organizations beyond maybe less helpful hindsight-informed responses. Everything's obvious after the fact. We know this. Hindsight is 2020. The people involved in an event didn't have that hindsight. They didn't know something bad was about to happen. Another really critical piece of this principle where we're trying to push people and organizations a little bit is around taking appropriate actions post-event. And appropriate is the kind of critical word here. Many organizations will put in place, after an event, they'll have policies like all events must be investigated. Every contributing factor must have an action and things like this. And it's this always and will and never type language, which creates situations where we create work. Essentially, we create work and we create systems and more procedures and more rules and more of the things we discussed right at the outset. Organizations need to get better at appreciating, well, sometimes the action is learning. Learning is in itself an action. We don't have to put something in place for everything we identify. We can't fix everything. And oftentimes things won't be fixed. We can improve it, we can make it better. So it's about moving beyond some of the less helpful responses, which just can create more work and create more busyness in safety, but not necessarily more effectiveness in safety. And the final thing which this principle is trying to reinforce to organizations is that no one comes to work to screw up or to get hurt. That should always be our first response when something bad goes wrong, is think internally. The natural response is going to probably be to blame, but the second thing we need to think is this person didn't intend for this to happen. If organizations and we as individuals responded more in this way, I think with society would be a much happier place to be in a lot of the time of it. Why did it make sense for someone to do this? What was it they were intending to do? Did they intend for the bad outcome? And very often, people haven't intended for that bad outcome. So that's our principles. And hopefully we've recapped here on what the intent of these principles is. So what do they look like in practice? Well, as I mentioned at the start, there is no one right way to do HOP. Now, there are things that probably there is no point in reinventing. So things like learning teams are a really handy tool. So there are guides available, and I'll be sharing a link shortly on how to do something like learning teams, or how to do things like walkthroughs, talkthroughs. These are tools that are already existing. And as they say, there's no point reinventing the wheel. So some of these things are, you could say that this is a proven method and here's how to do it. but that's not to say that's the only way of doing it. So what do we see when organizations put these principles into action? Well, looking at the 5 elements of our maturity model here on the right hand side, our HOP maturity model. Well, one thing is around leadership. So we tend to see, generally speaking, leaders who are engaged with HOP really trying to have better field interactions, interactions with the workforce. I mentioned there better conversations, learning focused conversations, better response rather than reaction, whether that's to bad news or to an actual event. And they're moving from retributive approaches of justice to more restorative approaches. How do we get better rather than how do we get even? We tend to see both proactive learning, whether it's through things like learning teams and field insights, walk through, talk through, and better investigations. Maybe with better investigations, also less investigations. Many organizations we work with do too many investigations. They've written themselves into a corner. We'll investigate all events, when we all know some events probably won't yield very much learning, but it will create a lot of work, and it will create bureaucracy, and it will create stuff that needs to be done. We also tend to see then management system integration. This might involve decluttering, reducing the amount of workload that we're putting on people, but also then better procedures and better processes. And finally, risk management. That kind of critical risk approach. Where are the real big picture risks that we need to be keeping an eye on? And how do we ensure that those controls are really in place and working effectively as intended? And that's where there's a nice sort of interplay between both risk management and operational learning, seeking to understand work as done rather than work as imagined. So just a few words on operational learning, which is one way of actioning HOP and putting HOP to work, so to speak. Operational learning is about understanding the work from the perspective of the worker. How well do your current safety practices and your safety assurance practices, how well do they help you to learn from operator struggle? Where are the things that are challenging in work? Where are the things that make work harder? Where are the things that expose us to more risk? We have many tools that are focused on operator compliance, but not so many that are focused on operator struggle. And this is a kind of real key to unlocking that kind of real rich learning and insights, which can improve safety, but also improve work just more generally. So I'm not going to talk too much with this operational learning cycle, but this is something you can think about, which you can build into any of your existing tools that you have, whether it's audits, whether it's inspections, whether it's things like learning teams, investigations. How well do all those things, first of all, learn? They may be intended to learn, but how else do they learn about what the issues really are before defining issues and then putting in place actions to improve? How well do we seek to understand our current system, the current system of work that our people are operating in every day? When things go wrong, do our questions all seem very much like these ones to the right-hand side? Or are they more focused on the things on the left-hand side, helping us to understand what does everyday work look like? This is a real critical shift that HOP is helping us to make, both in the proactive learning and also in the reactive learning. So if you're interested in learning more about operational learning and what that might look like, the QR code here will take you to a page on our website on hoplab.org, where you can download a range of guides completely free. And these are things that you can start doing right away, some of them. Like better questions, that's something you can do and start using. You don't need permission, you don't need a program, you don't need really anything other than the opportunity to go out and ask better questions and see where that leads you to. So please feel free to go there and download whatever appeals to you. So to summarize and to wrap up the webinar, these principles, as I mentioned, they are a program. but they are principles that inform our practice as safety professionals, but also in other parts of the organization too, and in other disciplines. So just reflect on these principles and think, well, how, with these principles in mind, how might I do this particular task or activity differently? And that can be things that you are already doing. So whether it's audits or inspections or things like that we've been doing forever, what would that look like? What would those audits or inspections look like if we really were very interested in context? If we were really interested in where is it easy to make a mistake? Where is it easy for things to go wrong? If I was new to this task, where would I likely be caught out? These small shifts can really be quite transformational. So that's a brief whistle-stop tour of some things of what HOP is and a few things about what HOP is not. But I can see there's some things in the chat feed, and there's no doubt some questions too. So thank you for joining us today. Please feel free to put in your questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That was really insightful. We did have a few people say they raised their hands, but if they can just throw what they were wanting to talk about in the chat, and then we'll address it there. So Mark has jumped into the chat. Thanks, Mark. Do you have any HOP case studies specific to quality items?
Do I have any examples which are specific to quality? Well, I think, to be honest, the HOP approach, when we go out and explore work, say we're doing learning teams or field insights, essentially what our key focus is on work, which maybe traditional service, that would be quality management, which is about putting in place the right processes and practices to ensure a consistent product that meets customer expectations. Well, HOP is kind of bridging both quality and safety. So HOP principles can be applied in a quality setting, and HOP and operational learning tools can absolutely be applied to quality problems. Some of the challenges we've been asked to come in and help with have been probably what we could traditionally call quality problems as opposed to safety problems. But I guess the way we're trying to look at it is it's an organizational problem. Whether it's got a safety aspect to it or a quality aspect to it, it essentially is it's a problem that needs to be understood. And HOP provides us with the preconditions to learn and the tools to learn. So hopefully that
coming through in the chat, Andy, from David. I haven't read it yet, but it might just be more of a comment. Example question slide is really going to be useful. That is a good slide, Andy. I haven't seen that one before. Started in HPI with self-checking in US nuclear industry back in, I think, the 1980s, not the 1080s. Thanks, David. That was just a comment, but yeah, I think that slide was really useful too. So just so everyone knows that the webinar has been recorded, so it will be going up on our YouTube later today, and we'll send around a recording as well, because there might be a few things like out of those slides that you'd like to take and apply.
Yeah, for sure. And I saw in the chat feed here, it mentioned that the QR code is expired. That's my bad. That's a QR code I'd set up for a few weeks ago. And then, of course, if you don't use the paid version, they do expire. So, but if someone just goes to our HOPLAB website, so hoplab.org, there's a tab there for guides and resources, I think it is, Katie, and people can, absolutely download them from there.
Yeah, I've included the link in the chat as well. There was one other question from Kia. Any HOP principles for operational risk management? So risk obviously comes into the topic a lot.
So none of the principles specifically applicable to risk management, but all of them are also applicable to risk management. So, for example, if you're doing a risk assessment, how well does it capture human variability, adaptations, and so forth? So, how well do they account for things like error traps, places where it's easy to make mistakes? So, you can, if you were to look at any of your risk processes and then consider in parallel, okay, what if I accept these principles, how would they inform the way I go about doing that risk assessment? Well, there could be a whole range of different changes that you might want to make to that process. Where you want to do the risk assessment may also change too. One of the things that we tend to see is massive overuse of risk management tools in places where maybe they're not that helpful. So then HOP would be more encouraging us to look at the sticky and the stabby, so the stuff that kills you and the stuff that bankrupt you. So all the principles absolutely can have a bearing on risk management. And then in terms of the final piece, I'll just say critical thing about risk management at the end of the day is the questions we want to ask is where are the potential issues and what are we doing about it? Which is then, okay, what are the controls we put in place? Well, do the controls exist on a spreadsheet or do they actually exist in reality? Operational learning is how we go out and really verify that the controls that we have in our spreadsheet or the controls we have on a safe work method statement are actually in place and working. So I think that's the real critical piece of how HOP helps us with risk management.
Great. I think we're all through the chat now. Lots of comments saying it was very informative, and we will be having more HOP webinars coming up. So keep an eye out on our LinkedIn for links to register for our next talks in the series as well. So there's plenty more to learn.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.